As we look at the formation of the gospel, we see a development between Mark and Matthew and Luke. Now, the way this appears seems to show that there are 230 or so sayings that appear in Matthew and Luke almost exactly the same and do not appear in the Gospel of Mark. This has led to the belief that there was a set of sayings that existed that Matthew and Luke had, which Mark did not. Because they are so similar in nature, the most probable explanation is that there was a list of sayings that Matthew and Luke had access to. Because they quote so similarly and exact words in some cases, then it's most probable that they used a set of sayings. This set of sayings is something called Q by the scholars, which stands for the German word Quelle, or source. So the Q source is a set of sayings used by Matthew and Luke in order to compose their Gospels, in addition to what they had from the Gospel of Mark. The sayings in Q seem to show Jesus as simply a teacher of knowledge. They are not interested. The Q source is not interested in the actions that Jesus took or trying to frame necessarily who he was in relationship to God. These sayings also appear outside of the Gospels, many of them in a gospel called the Gospel of Thomas, which is a little bit later and is in other languages. Now, in Q, a number of things take place, a number of sayings, which include the temptation of Jesus in the desert by the devil. Those are included in Q, which means they are in Matthew and Luke. The Beatitudes, which are blessings, and in Luke, woes against people who are wealthy and do well in this life. The Beatitudes only appear in Matthew and Luke, and they appear differently between those two Gospels. In Q, there are warnings of an upcoming tribulation, which is widely believed to be uh, related to the results of the Jewish revolt between 66 and 70. And there was a great sense among the gospel writers, but especially in Q, that those events were the beginning of the end and that they would culminate in the return of Jesus to the earth for judgment. There is no concern for the meaning of Jesus' death as the key to salvation. In fact, the most important thing that Jesus did was share his heavenly information with his followers. Jesus is simply a teacher of wisdom and not a savior of the world in the Q source. Now, on the next slide, you'll see a diagram of the gospel formation. You will see that Mark began with his material, his story. That material was used by Matthew and Luke. Matthew had both Q and some of his own information in putting together his gospel. Luke had Q and some of his own information also in putting together his gospel. And that process ended up with the gospels that we have today, the synoptic gospels.